Well, good afternoon. Thank you. That's obviously for them and not for me, because none of you know who I am, and that's just fine. But this is going to be a very fun conversation. You are in for a treat. I'm pretty excited about this, of all of the things I'm doing here at WebSummit, because I feel like this is a conversation that is happening in a lot of places, and it obviously affects all of us. And I think in order to sort of talk about what it would mean to rethink the way the internet is built, we should start by kind of giving some context about how the internet was built and what do we mean by that. Brendan, don't take this the wrong way, but you've been doing the internet for a while now.
Yeah.
It's like, what do we mean when we think about how the internet was built? And I don't just mean like technically the protocols, I'm talking about the companies.
Yeah, I think it's important to let the internet evolve because that's how it got here. It's messy. There's a lot of accidental innovation. People do things like I did JavaScript to make pages lively, and it got used for tracking. Images got used for tracking too, and cookies were also for a good reason. When you log in at your bank, you stay logged in. They got used for tracking too. But we can fix things with evolution the same way that they broke. So I think we have to keep working on improving the internet over time. I don't think we get a chance to redo it, press the button and wipe it all out and start over.
So at some point, you mentioned that there were some technologies that made it possible to, the word you used was tracking. So it became pretty clear that one of the most profitable ways to build a business on the internet is to gather as large of an audience as you could, attract them to a product that was free, and then advertise, right? And advertising in and of itself, I think we would all agree is not necessarily bad, but something happened.
Yeah, the primal sin, they call it, of the internet was that people got conditioned to expect free. I think that's not quite right. A lot of people aren't going to pay until they're convinced there's something worth paying for, and you see that now with Substack. You get to read it for free for a while, and then you pay, and I pay too much. I subscribe to a lot of things. But what really was the problem was the data collection by these network powers. Every time you have a network, you tend to have a lot of people who are just on the outside of it using browsers, and on the middle you have servers that become very powerful, and one or two of them take over. And if they collect all the data, that becomes your Google Ad Exchange that's tied into search and YouTube and Android, Google Play Store, and everything else. And that's the problem. It's not the ads, it's the surveillance.
Okay, so you said surveillance, which obviously surveillance is the opposite of privacy. And Andy, you built a company built on the idea that users should not just have control over their own data, but just, it's none of your business, right? If I want to send an email, no one should have the ability to read that. But that's actually kind of a revolutionary thought, because email is, I'm sorry to tell you, but none of your emails are secure, right? Like Proton is one of the very few companies, there may be others, that end-to-end encrypts email. So like, you took a very different stance. Talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when I started in 2014, you would often meet investors, right? And they kind of said back then, so your idea of a business is to compete with the world's most powerful tech company and charging money for a product they give away for free, right? Obviously they didn't get it, but in reality, Google's products, Gmail, isn't actually free, right? You are paying for it. You're paying for it with your most intimate, sensitive data, which you can never really take back. So there's no such thing as a free lunch. You're eventually going to have to pay somewhere. And I think when we look at Proton Mail in our business model, it's simply about being kind of more honest and transparent with the user, right? Instead of paying with your data and paying in a way that maybe you don't really think about, we're just going to say, why don't you just give us $4 a month? And in exchange, we can promise and guarantee that your data will not be monetized or abused in any way. And I think that's kind of a new way of thinking about business online that is much more sustainable and really builds the incentives that aligns companies with their customers.
So if we were going to rethink the way the internet was built, what's the alternative, right? Because here's the thing, like, it turns out that Google and Facebook are the two largest advertising platforms in the world. Why? Because it works. Right? If you're a business and you want to attract an audience, there's really no more effective tools than Facebook or Google search ads, right? Mm-hmm. So, what is the alternative? Because there are a lot of unintended consequences. So what do we do different?
So I admire Moxie Marlinspike, a hacker who wrote an essay everyone should read about Web3, because he started using decentralization technologies and he realized a lot of them still rely on centralized servers or clients talking to servers that trust the server. Like email, for decades, just sent that message so anybody could eavesdrop on it. Until Netscape did the secure sockets layer, if you used the web and you sent your credit card to a merchant, somebody could eavesdrop or tamper with the message. So that took incremental work to fix. The email fix that they tried, that wasn't Proton, I used Proton, was to start the message transmission unencrypted and then put a little keyword in saying, let's start encrypting here. And that doesn't work because you can intercept that and mess with it too. So you have to have better cryptography. And this is something people, it's mathematically confusing and scary, but it's basically ways of using functions that are hard to reverse to hide secrets and make them look like noise. And this can be used effectively not just for email end-to-end encryption, but for all sorts of transactions that we currently just trust the server on. Instead, we should verify that the server is doing what it said. And that's part of what I think needs to happen for Web3.
So the internet is obviously a very big place, right? We have a company that makes a web browser, a company that makes email. Like, those are probably two of the things people do the most other than maybe messaging on the internet. You talked about something that we could do to make email more secure, but the truth is, like, most people don't really care, right? I mean, most people use Google, I'm sorry, and most people use Gmail or Safari or whatever. I mean, I do personally use Brave, but most people aren't willing to go through that extra effort to make those changes. Andy, how do we change that?
Well, I think you hit the key word there, right? The key word here is effort. And I think for privacy to really go mainstream, you have to make it effortless, right? Encrypted email actually isn't a new idea. In fact, there's something called PGP that came in the early 90s. And what PGP managed to prove over a period of maybe 25 years was that one click was too much, right? So if you look at how we want to make privacy more mainstream, you have to make it so easy that there's almost no friction. Because if I ask anybody out here today, do you want more security or privacy? No one says no, right? It's always a question of, what do I give up? And if we can make the technology so good that what you give up is practically nothing, then actually I don't see any reason why someone wouldn't want to adopt, a better email service or a better browser, that is more secure and more private.
Yeah, go ahead.
We make Brave easy to use, so you can just switch from Chrome, import all your bookmarks and other settings. You can start in Brave and keep using Chrome in case you're worried. You can just cold switch to Brave. It's faster, it saves battery, and you don't have those annoying ads and trackers. So they're all tied together because the tracking scripts and the ads run the radio or run the data, run the Ethernet, and burn your battery, and that slows down the page load. So you win performance, battery life, and privacy all at once.
So Google has said many times that they're going to phase out the third-party cookie in the browser. And every time they do, I write an article about it, and it's wonderful. They fill my content calendar every 3 or 4 months. They've tried Flock. They've tried all these different things to eliminate third-party tracking with cookies and try to put you into it gets very confusing. The truth is that if Google wanted to kill the cookie, they could have done it like instantly, right? Brave automatically blocks tracking. Safari already does it.
Yep.
Right, there are browsers that do that. If Google wanted to, it could be done. Why are they not doing it?
I think they have a lot of publisher partners or customers, really, of the supply side of the ad exchange. And those publishers want third-party cookies for various reasons. They want to use other vendors than Google. They want to optimize. And Google can't just kill it. They're already in antitrust court. If they killed the cookie even faster, a lot of these companies would complain. It would just add to the antitrust case.
Yeah, because actually Google has basically perfect knowledge of what you do on Google's properties. So it's sort of this weird catch-22. Andy?
Yeah, well, that's the point. I think there's so much focus on third-party cookies and third-party tracking, but no one's talking about first-party tracking, right? As a user, I don't think it's the third-party tracking that is the most annoying. It's the first-party tracking. So I don't want any tracking at all. So all the focus on third-party tracking is a bit of a distraction from the core issue, which is that everything, even without the cookies, is being tracked.
In fact, nobody knows what the first party and third party mean. If you go to your bank, you better know it's your bank. You're not being phished. That's the first party. If there's something embedded in the page from Google, that's a third party. But Google is a first party and a third party. And because of all the ad blocking and tracking protection that Brave and other products do, people are starting to bury the third-party elements inside first-party scripts. So they're hiding as if they were part of your bank. And that's harder to block. We still do it. It can be done. It's a technological arms race. And I think the browser wins if enough users adopt Brave or another browser that has similar protections. But Google doesn't care. Chrome doesn't block anything by default because that will go against their business interests.
Now, okay, we've talked about Google. I want to talk about Apple for a minute. Yeah. And because we've talked about first-party tracking, which is really interesting when it comes to Apple. I've talked to Apple, and when you ask them about tracking, they mean something very specific, and they mean the third-party stuff. It literally means taking data and transferring it to another organization. But obviously, Apple has perfect data of if you download an app on the App Store, it knows exactly what was downloaded. So a lot of people think of Apple as being the more privacy-centered platform, right, compared to Google or compared to Facebook. Andy, in our conversations, I get the feeling you disagree.
Yeah, well, it depends on what you mean by privacy, right? And when Apple says they're a privacy company, what they really mean is nobody can abuse your data except for us. But the real definition of privacy is no one can abuse my data, period, right? And actually, this type of privacy washing, Google does it too, right? If you look at Google I/O conference earlier this year, they talk about privacy by design. But Google's privacy by design really means we'll let you have options for how we abuse your data, right? And I think, so the goal has to be about making sure that we don't let big tech redefine what privacy means. Because that's the fastest way to lose privacy, is if you change the definition and you move the goalposts, then you can claim that you're private, right? And I think this is why it's very important to understand that privacy means nobody can abuse your data, period. And that period is very important.
So I love my Apple. I've been an iPhone loyalist since the first generation. But Apple is charging 30% on the App Store, and this is forcing apps away from using payments toward using ads. And it has all kinds of bad effects. I'm actually kind of shocked. I think Steve Jobs would not approve of the ads they just rolled out. You've probably heard about these. Like you go to get an app to help you with your gambling addiction, and you're getting ads for apps that help you gamble, right? This is maybe just a learning step that Apple's taking, but I don't think ads done that way are right, and they go against my idea of what Apple should be. But like you said, Facebook does it, Google does it. All the big first parties do it. They advantage themselves, and that gets them in antitrust court.
So that's an interesting point. And Andy, I want to ask you about this because you have said to me before, Andy, that Apple is actually disincentivizing apps and services that want to better protect your privacy by not showing you ads because they are taking 30% of that subscription, which means as a business, it's actually better to give your product away for free and then show ads. Now they want to take a cut of some of those ads too now, but talk about that.
Yeah, well, I think Apple talks about privacy, but at the end of the day, when there's a debate between privacy or profit, Apple has consistently chosen profit over privacy, right? And I can give you the App Store example very clearly. You know, Proton today, we have Proton Mail, Proton VPN, and quite a few other apps within the App Store. We're also going to be launching our Proton Drive app pretty soon in the App Store, right? And as a small business, I have to actually pay 30% of my revenue on Apple devices to Apple. Now, if you take a look at Facebook, which has 1 billion users, but it's based off an ad model, they pay nothing because Facebook doesn't monetize through subscriptions. Facebook monetizes through ads. And so what this is doing is it's creating a 30% fee, a 30% tax that is hitting businesses that are subscription-based, that are protecting privacy. Because if I can't do ads, then I need to take a subscription, right? And this is creating a market incentive or disincentive that is steering app developers to adopt an ad-based model because it's simply more lucrative and has better margins as opposed to subscriptions where you need to pay a third of your revenue to big tech. And Apple does this, Google does this as well. And I think if Apple really is going to be a privacy company and claims to be a privacy company, they shouldn't be put in place policies that actively discourage you from adopting a privacy-first business model.
Have you noticed Apple's ATT, their anti-app tracking feature, is hurting Facebook? Facebook says they lost $10 billion over this. So you see these big dinosaurs battling, and they each use their first-party platform power to hurt the other one. But what they don't do is protect the user's privacy against them. And you can imagine, Brave wants to do this. We want to make the browser, even with the first party, make things more forgotten over time. Imagine if you went to a site and you had all cookies blocked. You'd have to log in every time you go to your bank and navigate around. That would be a pain. But if you leave your bank and then come back to it, maybe that's fine. You can forget everything. So we're trying to move the web toward a more forgetful, stateless model for privacy. But it's very hard given these entrenched powers, these big tech companies.
So Brendan, you mentioned the ads. You know, if you're not aware, a couple of weeks ago, Apple started to add ads in the App Store. And the App Store is probably the most transformative platform when it comes to this for a couple of reasons, right? There would be no Facebook behemoth without its app, which goes to the App Store. Like that's kind of the key. And what was happening is because Apple wasn't necessarily targeting users, they weren't using personalized ads, they were just using keywords, right? And if this app is about a thing, we'll show another app that's about a thing. The problem is you might be looking for like a marriage counseling app and it's showing you a dating app or some weird combination like that, which almost makes the point that Facebook's model is better, because at least if you're gonna see ads, they should be like relevant to what you care about. That seems like a very big hurdle to get over, right? We've seen what the bad model is.
Yep.
And the truth is, like, advertising is what a lot of things are built on. It's the internet, it's publishing, it's all of these things. What is the solution here? I mean, besides convincing Apple to stop charging 30%, which I know is one thing that you would love to see happen. Yeah. What is the solution?
So we built a private ad system in Brave. It's optional, it's not on by default. It doesn't collect data. It does the matching in the browser only when you turn it on, because the browser already knows your history and knows your queries, so it can have local machine learning agents that discover good matches against a catalog of offers. That's just a catalog we push out to the same set of people everywhere in a city or a large region, so there's no privacy loss in turning that Brave Rewards ad system on. Then when the machine learning picks the best ad per day, you can adjust the frequency. If you don't like it, you can say thumbs down. And the ad view is counted using a cryptographic protocol that I mentioned that makes you anonymously unlinkable to any other ad you saw. So we don't know what ads you've seen, but we know that you authentically saw an ad, and your bean is counted as authentic to the advertiser. And that's all we give them. If you click on the ad, you go to a landing page that's the full tab, the advertiser owns that, now they're the first party, and you can have a clean interaction with them if you like. You can log in, you can become a brand champion or influencer. That's a better model. I'm not saying it's the perfect solution, but it's something we built to show advertising does not need central surveillance.
Okay. Andy.
Well, there's a lot of focus on ads, but you have to remember, ads isn't a new thing, right? It was existing for centuries before, in the internet. You can go to the ruins of Pompeii from 2,000 years ago and find ads, they're in the ruins, right? So ads have been around forever. And so I don't think the focus is really on the ads, but actually kind of the consequence of the model, right? The problem with big tech isn't that it's big or that it does ads, right? The problem with big tech is that they're using their market dominance to entrench a business model that simply doesn't put the interests of the average consumer at heart. And it's entrenching a business model in a way that doesn't allow other competing models to actually compete and get space to grow. And this means that we're locked in a cycle where essentially all of our data will be commoditized, monetized, abused, misused, forever. And the question is, how do we get out of that cycle? And the issue isn't so much to do with ads, but actually the leveraging of the monopoly power in one vertical of the internet to enter other verticals and lock other players out.
So when we talk about limiting power, we're obviously going to start talking about regulation, okay? Yeah. And it was interesting because when Apple announced app tracking transparency was going to come in iOS 14, Facebook took out full-page ads in the New York Times, the USA Today, I think maybe the Wall Street Journal, essentially accusing Apple of being an enemy of the open internet. A little bit melodramatic, but their point was that the open internet was built upon really this ad model. And the only way that looks like it might change is if governments might get their, in the US, the government hasn't been very good about that. The EU, it's a little bit different. Can we regulate our way to a more free and open internet?
Yeah, I think the Apple-Facebook thing is like really funny, right? Because it's kind of like two tech giants fighting over who gets to abuse the user's data. And it's like, maybe neither of you should be abusing user data, right? But to talk about regulation, my belief actually is that we shouldn't have too much regulation. Regulation, the government stepping in, is not generally a positive thing. Government's not that efficient, right? But there are cases where you need government intervention. And that is cases where capitalism and the market dynamics, don't succeed in curing the problem. So let's take a look at, whether it's Apple, Facebook, or Google. These tech giants have no financial or market incentive to fix the problem, because they're the ones that are massively benefiting from this problem at the expense of all of society, right? So if you're in a situation where the market dynamics and capitalism can't solve the problem for you, then unfortunately you need to have regulation that steps in. So I think we have reached a point where without some regulation coming from the EU or the US, probably we don't break out of the status quo.
I think the antitrust case is on in the US. It's a little bit slow since 2020. DOJ in several states, including Texas and Oklahoma, have Google dead to rights. They have violated 15 USC 1 through 38, the Sherman and Clayton Acts of the US federal law that say you cannot, if you get a monopoly, that's maybe okay, that's natural, it happens. But if you then use that monopoly to take over an adjacent market by tying products together, you acquire a product in that market or you copycat somebody in that market, you tie it into your monopoly and you crush all the innovators and competitors in that new market, that's not legal. And that's a case that's going, I think, forward, and it's going to hurt Google next year, I bet, because they tied search into Android. This already got addressed by DG Comp in Europe. There's the Digital Markets Act that just took effect 2 days ago. We could talk about that. But regulators are often late, and if they don't have well-grounded principles, they tend to do damage or they just fight the last war, and there's a new war fighting. Think about CompuServe and Prodigy and AOL in the early mid-90s, dial-up services, those were walled gardens. It's kind of what we're risking heading toward into with Facebook and Google. But what happened? We had Netscape make the browser easy to use and popular and secure through cryptography. So suddenly the open web took off instead of these walled gardens. And that's through innovation. That wasn't regulation.
Yeah, and one of the things that has historically happened, at least in the United States where most of these companies are based, is that politicians and courts aren't always the best at grasping the actual issues, right? And you see things like the Apple versus Epic case. Apple has currently won that. Epic is appealing. And they're also in a fight with Google. And one of the things that is interesting there is that Google may have a harder time because Android is open, right? But they require you to, if you want Android, you have to also have the Google Play Store.
Yeah.
Is it going to be
and
courts
Chrome.
or governments or
Yeah.
Andy?
Well, I mean, I can give an example of kind of like, they make it out to be complicated issues, but it's actually fairly simple. So let's take the example of an Android user that knows about Proton Mail and wants to use Proton Mail. What is the process of getting Proton Mail on an Android device today? You have to download it first from Google Play, which is a default, a Play Store. You can use a different app store, but it's practically impossible. To use Google Play, you have to get a Gmail account. There's other ways to do it, but also practically impossible. So we're in an absurd situation where if you want to use a Gmail competitor, you must have Gmail in order to do that. And let's say you've managed to get Gmail to get Proton Mail, as absurd as that sounds, right? And then you want to go browse the web. You're going to open up in Chrome, because that's by default. Unfortunately, it's not Brave yet, but hopefully one day we'll get there, right? You open up an email link in Chrome, and guess what? It takes you back to Gmail. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to really know that this is not an environment where anybody can really fairly compete. Is Google going to be incentivized to change this on their own? Is there any universe in which they will voluntarily decide to dismantle this system of tying and self-preferencing? I think no way in hell, right? And this is exactly why I think regulatory action is required.
So the Digital Markets Act, 2 days ago came in force, says if you're a big platform owner, you cannot force defaults that cannot be changed. You have to present choice panels. You have to allow alternative browsers and alternative search engines, things like that. This was already a subject with DG Comp, as I mentioned. Unfortunately, the remedy in that prior incident was Google invented a choice panel, and the way you got into the choice panel was by buying Play Store ads to get rank in a country. So Google was both the arsonist and the firefighter, which is not a good answer. I think innovation is needed, and some of these principled legal reforms are helpful because they say users have rights to pick their own default. iOS 14 allowed you to pick Brave as the default, finally, after Safari being the only browser that could be default forever until that point. And one of the reasons we think is there was a letter from a congressional antitrust panel that Brave helped ghostwrite a little bit, and it was addressed to Tim Cook, and it said, let users choose their mail and their browser apps.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. This is obviously a much bigger conversation. Let's give these two a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Okay.